And now I would like to introduce to you Professor Eleanor Fisher, Head of Research at the Nordic Africa Institute, to give the welcoming remarks.
Greetings, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this webinar on gender perspectives of the Ghana elections 2020. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Nordic Africa Institute, we're a Swedish public agency financed by Sweden, Finland, and Iceland. Our mandate combines high-quality research with skilled communication and extensive library collection. Against this background, our research focuses on the social science of modern Africa. So it's in this context we find that upcoming elections present opportunities to take stock of developments on the continent and to consider different aspects of the electoral process, including gender dynamics. Today we are focusing on Ghana, a strong democracy on the African continent, often hailed for its consolidated democratic processes, free speech, and active civil society. Now, of course, as I'm sure you know, going to the polls on December the 7th, 2020. Having said all that, an aspect of the Ghanaian democracy that appears as a paradox to observers such as myself is the low levels of representation of women in politics. This is an important conversation on inclusive democracy, matches well the drive for democracy and the feminist foreign policy of Sweden. With this in mind, this webinar takes a look at the Ghanaian elections 2020 from a gender perspective. We ask, what important reforms were implemented in the last 4 years? What can we expect both from this year's electoral process, especially a gender perspective of electoral violence? And what are the ways forward given the current status quo? The makeup of today's panel represents very well the policy nexus that NI embraces. Researchers, both from here at NI and from Ghana, civil society, including activists and journalists, and then all of you who have called in from all over the world, including policymakers, diplomats, fellow researchers, and students. I encourage all of you to engage with us, ask questions, surf into our website for resources after this session. On a final note, I would like to give a special welcome to the incoming Claude Ake Chair, Professor Kwesi Anning. Without further talking, I'll now hand over to the moderator for today's programme, Dr. Kajsa Hallberg Adu. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Eleanor Fisher. So glad to be here with all of you today, and we would like you to engage with us right away. Please write in the chat who you are and where you're calling in from. So we wanted to organize this webinar as close as possible to the Ghanaian elections, and now they're happening in less than 1 month. And as Eleanor said, the Republic of Ghana is a healthy democracy with a free, fair and contestation between several parties, free speech and media, vivid civil society. But so what explains leaving so little room for women in decision-making? Despite starting out with voting rights for men and women back in 1957, Ghana has a low level of women represented in parliament, only 13.5% compared to a continent average of 24% and a world average of slightly less, 23%. Despite increased pressure from civil society for improved women representation and party initiatives for broader representation, women decision makers, both on local and national levels, remain few. This year, 12 presidential candidates contest, 3 of whom are women. But it looks like it will be a tight race between the 2 major parties, the National Democratic Congress and the incumbent National Patriotic Party. And one of them, for the first time, has a woman on the ticket, Professor Nana Jane Upukajiman, as a vice presidential candidate for the NDC. So today we're taking a gendered perspective. What's the impact of this? We're using this lens to discuss the past 4 years, the lineup for this year's election, but also the electoral process. And I hope we'll also find time to discuss what to expect from the coming 4 years. So I'm going to lead the conversation today. So I wanted to share with you just the agenda for the day. Let's see. So my name is Kajsa Holberg-Edu, and I'm a postdoctoral scholar at the Nordic Africa Institute, usually working on a project on higher education and democratization. And before I present the distinguished and well-balanced panel we have with us to discuss today, I will just recognize a few of you calling in from across the world. We have people from Sweden. Sophie Hagmark is with us, Alfred Hammerklo from Copenhagen, Dennis Purideme from Ghana, Julius Kweshe for Airport West, Esther Karaoke joining from Gothenburg, Bernice Sam from Ghana, Gretchen Bauer is calling in from Wilmington, the home of the new US president, and maybe we'll come back to that, how that will impact on the Ghanaian election perhaps. We also have Dulce Pereira from Portugal. So all of you, you're welcome. And as we jump in to today's program, it would be wonderful if you also engage with us through the Q&A, where you can post your questions, but also upvote questions that you would like to hear an answer to, and I will start with them. So the panel consists of Kwesi Aning, he's a professor at the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Center, Diana Hoylund Madsen, who is a senior researcher with us here at NAI, Esther Tewia, she's the executive director for the Gender Center for Empowering Development, and Betty Kankambuadu, who is a journalist with the Media Foundation for West Africa. And we will let Professor Kwesi Aning start, so I'll just do a brief introduction and then hand over to him. Professor Kwesi Aning is the director at the Faculty of Academic Affairs and Research at the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center in Ghana. He's also the clinical professor of peacekeeping practice at Kennesaw State University in Atlanta. He holds a doctorate in political science from the University of Copenhagen, Denmark, and a BA in history from the University of Ghana. He has served at the African Union, the United Nations, the World Economic Forum's Council on Conflict Prevention. He's a very productive scholar and the incoming Claude Åke Visiting Chair at the Department of Peace and Conflict Research at Uppsala University in collaboration with the Nordic Africa Institute. So I'll give you the first 10 minutes and jump in and remind you when 1 minute is remaining. Prof. Aning, you can unmute yourself, so over to you.
Well, yes, thank you very much, Kajsa. Let me say a very big thank you to my fellow panelists. What I want to do is present 4 things about where we are in Ghana with respect to the gender dynamics of our politics, and then provide some thoughts going forward. Now, Ghana goes into its 8th democratic election under the 4th Republic in a couple of weeks. Of course, whilst our democratic consolidation has been praised as contributing to stability and economic development, I think as the introductory remarks have pointed out, when it comes to women's participation, we are not doing well. And I think we need to engage and to question why this is so. And therefore, as the country prepares for the final stretch into election 2020, it's imperative to interpret the conditions under which women are expected to participate politically within a dominant patriarchal society. What accounts for this dismal performance? Now, Ghanaian women who seek to engage within the political space are threatened by 2 existential challenges, I will argue. The first relates to the psychological trauma of abusive and threatening discourse. And number 2 is the orchestrated exclusion from politics through, the lack of financial wherewithal. Both are morally and institutionally inexcusable. Both have left legacies of pain, and these need to be addressed. So to address what I term as a misnomer, I discuss 4 issues. One is the issue of language and the representation of the feminine candidate. The second, the gender dimensions of violence, popularly known as vigilantism. The third, assessing the country's readiness for women to take high political office. And here I look at the language that has been used, particularly when the National Democratic Congress nominated its running mate. And then finally, some concluding remarks. Let me come to the issue of language and the misrepresentation of the female candidates. Language and its misuse within the context of ethnic, gender, and threatening statements have become part of Ghana's political discourses. The language employed, I argue, in political messaging, particularly relating to women, is often abusive, misogynistic, antisocial, and threatening. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, the use of indecent language has escalated, and the role of cyberbullies and vigilantes paid to threaten and abuse critics on the ascendancy. Politically, we are seeing partisan cyberbullies unleashing deliberate emotional, psychological abuse on critical voices, particularly critical female voices, and social media influencers. Vigilantism in the cyberspace has become a new menace within Ghana's political context. But I'll argue that we need to disaggregate this even much further. When language is used in an abusive, threatening manner, it becomes a weapon of psychological intimidation. And since political discourses determine how language is utilized, it becomes an instrument first for manipulating electorates by politicians, and eventually, and more dangerously, contributes to the normalization of anger and violence as part of the discourse. And I'll be giving very specific, targeted examples. Second is the discursive use of violence. The issuance of death threats, specific use of hate speech, defamation, and insults against women political activists. In the Ghanaian political context, women have to walk an extremely thin line. They have to be likable, but not authoritative. They have to be strong, but not aggressive. They want to be seen as serious, but not threatening. Conscious of the patriarchal system that they come from, women politicians are forced or intimidated into negotiating this very tightrope that I have placed up there. As a result of these expectations and these barriers, women have had to be strong, assertive, to be able to negotiate and maneuver in an environment that is increasingly hostile and violent. And even where public statements are made, I would argue that they are often in a patronizing context. But there are furthermore portrayals of how language is used in predominantly negative terms to make it almost impossible for women to play this role, and that explains the context within which the 13.5%. One is the sexualization frame, and this has been argued very eloquently by Louis Donko. Women presented as prostitutes, the family portrayal, women political activists are women who cannot or who are without husbands. If you are unmarried, then you are unsuitable. But of course, women are also portrayed, women politicians are women in need of men. They are bad homemakers. They use narcotics. They are witches, you know. But also more importantly, these are lone women who are non-conformist. Okay? So the frame within which the political figure, the female political figure is presented is predominantly negative. Let me touch tangentially on the violence that we have understood and is presented normally within the context of male political vigilantism, and talk very briefly, a minute or two, about a rarely discussed aspect of notions of masculinity, violence, strength, and power that overlooks the role that women are playing as vigilante performers. One of the rarely discussed dimensions of vigilante dynamics in Ghana relates also to the roles of women in these groups, about their ability to incite violence and to ignite the passions that contribute to violence. In a recent series of interviews in July this year, women participate in these militia groups directly or indirectly, but at the periphery and not in the mainstream. And of course, there are isolated instances where women have been spotted among the leaders. But where women play roles, from my empirical study, they are more often than not a force for good, acting as those who resolve conflicts. So now I've tried to situate the context within which women can play a role in politics. Let me drill down to the specifics, the empirics of a woman or women who want to play these key roles. On July 27th this year, the NDC, the National Democratic Congress, nominated officially Professor Jane Nana Opoku-Agyeman, an accomplished academic, as Ghana's first, who served as Ghana's first vice chancellor of a public university, as the running mate. In presenting Nana Opoku-Agyeman, this is what John Mahama said, quote, "The candidate is God-fearing, a distinguished scholar, a conscientious public servant, and a role model." This presentation, unfortunately, elicited very disturbing misogynistic responses from the governing party.
1 minute.
Oh, okay, making a mockery of Jane Nana Opoku-Agyeman. She was described as a malam, as a witch, as a juju woman, and also that because she's menopausal, she may not be able to reason well. Now, several other things have happened, but precisely because of time constraints, which we can come back, I would like to conclude by making a couple of points. One, women are Ghana's hidden resource. They will be the basis, and they are the basis and the foundation upon which Ghana's democratic and economic development will thrive. I personally represent someone who has benefited from a woman who was strong and dedicated. Low political participation as women in Ghana needs to be tackled through education, income, and then social re-engineering. There's no doubt that cultural socialization and sexist attitudes are present, and that we need to move beyond putting women in a gender box of being mothers, wives, and care providers for their husbands. They've demonstrated without any shadow of doubt that when giving public access, that they are able to deliver. Finally, dealing with the debilitating gender imbalance in Ghanaian politics compels us to look at a national approach that introduces a multi-track set of interventions consisting of government statutory actions, as well as proactive, constructive engagement by all Ghanaian parties. So, Kasa, let me leave my initial introduction comment, and thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Prof. We are seeing comments in the chat that people are appreciating this summary. I think I also really appreciated the examples, and especially now when we had a vice presidential candidate woman being presented, and the discourse around that, I think, definitely is part to understanding this issue. I'll hand over to my colleague, Dr. Diana Höjdlund Madsen is a senior gender researcher at the Nordic Africa Institutes. Her PhD is on gender mainstreaming processes in Ghana, and she's written articles and book chapters about gender and politics in Ghana. She has recently edited a book on gendered institutions and women's political representation in Africa, which will be published in December, and has written a case study on Ghana for this book. She has also published a policy note, which I believe is the most downloaded policy note at NIE, on the affirmative action bill in Ghana. So please, Diana, the floor is yours. So I also give you 10 minutes. You need to unmute so we can hear you.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Kaiser. I wanted to state a few points about the landscape. It's clear that the landscape has been dominated by two main parties, NDC and NPP, which had 98% of the votes in the last 2016 election, meaning that in reality, Ghana is a two-party system. It also implies that if women want influence, they have to go where the power is and support the dominant political parties, kind of reinforcing the status quo. But there are also other examples than this NDC female running mate of leading women in politics. For example, Nana Konadu Rawlings for the National Democratic Party and the leader of the former influential 31st December Women's Movement. She's a presidential candidate. And then there are other parties, for example, CPP, the Convention People's Party, which is traditionally a quite women-friendly party and was the first party to introduce a gender quota in Ghana, which died with the overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah. Kwesi talked a lot about the increasing electoral violence, so I will not go so much into details about that. But I would like to mention that I view it as a part of a broader politics of insults, rumors, and ridicule that's going on the political scene in Ghana. I have the perspectives that it's an informal institution working against more women in politics, meaning that it's a socially shared rule, it's unwritten and created, communicated and enforced through channels which are largely unofficial. And it works against or in parallel with formal rules to preserve status quo or existing power relations. It is very clear that women in politics are more under scrutiny than their fellow male colleagues and are attacked on the basis of their gender and sexuality. And as Kwesi Anning pointed out, the female running mate was accused of being a witch, and there were also comments about her looks, her hair, her dressing, her religion. And this is a country where witchcraft prevails, and it may potentially be dangerous to be associated with supernatural powers. I have similar findings from my research and interviews with female parliamentarians, where they have comments about their makeups instead of debating political issues, and also other examples of women who have been labeled as witches, and where their political opponents have claimed that everybody who shakes her hand should go and wash with seawater. So those are the types of comments that some of these women get. There has also been a questioning of the competence of this female running mate. She has been compared with, for example, former Minister of Foreign Affairs for NDC, Hanne Tete, and it has been questioned by the NPP opponents, what exactly can she bring to the table in a way to try and undermine her professional competences. Similar things have happened, for example, to female heads of the electoral commissions. formerly Charlotte Osei, and currently Jean Mensa, who have been accused of being literally in bed with respective one or the other government. There are also examples from my material that women or female MPs who are very outspoken, assertive, and relatively powerful, as Kwesi Anin talked about, have been associated with masculine traits, and they are labeled Ya as en toi, which is a warrior queen, but it is not meant in a very positive way, the way it's being phrased. They are being cartooned as well. I think based on the current debate in Ghana, I would like to say a few words about the Affirmative Action Bill. It is very clear that Ghana is not on the fast track to women's political representations like countries like Ghana or Senegal, for example. Both the current regime with Nana Akufo-Addo has had as a target to adopt the Affirmative Action Bill, and also the former government with Mahama had this on his list of things to do, but none of them succeeded. And this despite of the fact that Nana Akufo-Addo has even been appointed as an AU gender champion. But for the 2020 election, the NDC has adopted a kind of gender profiling and has a manifesto with a promise of a minimum of a 30% quota, as well as the adoption of the Affirmative Action Bill, as well as other initiatives on gender, for example, in relation to land issues, but also in relation to violence against women. Whereas the NPP has not really included it in their manifesto. So for the NPP, I don't think it has been considered a winning case. The president has had to apologize for the delay for the adoption of this Affirmative Action Bill in one of the opening speeches in the parliament. Also, it has not been the top priority of voters. It is ranked number 8 out of 20 in National Commission for Civic Education report, although female voices ranked it higher. And it is not on the top of critical issues MPs should address as lawmakers, as only 18.2% voted it like that. Also, NPP had an initiative which failed to introduce women's seat in constituencies where a woman was already in place just before the 2016 election, which created a big stir in the party. And it was stated by especially some of the male incumbents in the affected constituencies that some of these female MPs were quite unpopular in their constituencies. There was also a strong fear that this could become a permanent measure. And there was a fear that NDC would put up a very strong male candidate, which could win over these female candidates. And then there was some criticism that some of these women would be handing their positions on a silver platter. Therefore, there is this need for more cross-party solutions. Now,
Diana.
Yeah, now there has been suggestions to increase the number of MPs, and in that way earmark some of these seats for female MPs or reserve seats in the strongholds for women. That is for NDC, the Volta region, and for MPP, the Ashanti region. I think it's also relevant, like Kwesi Anin said, to talk about the monetarization of politics. There is a report that documents that the expenditures on parliamentary election on average has increased 90% from 2012 to the latest 2016 election. Of course, we don't know yet what the costs are for this election, but I don't think there is any reason to suggest that it's going down. And that generally works against more women in politics. I would like to say a few points about the gendered effects of the COVID-19 situation affecting the election as well. And one thing is that money is kind of floating around because of the channeling of funds to combat COVID-19, and perhaps not always followed by clear monitoring mechanisms, which can be used or abused for voter buying, etc. There's been much campaigning on digital media. So this politics of insults, rumors, and ridicule takes place on other platforms as well that needs to be explored and researched further. There are fewer electoral observers at a time where violence is increasing. It may influence the level of women voting and the participation of women for political parties in the processes. Also, one may think about available money for specific gender initiatives, because there will be a need of allocation of resources from the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection for general social protection measures following the pandemic. And then there is this with the effect on the informal sector. For example, there are many female traders. So there is a need to also focus on women's economic empowerment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diana. I think you touched on so many important issues. Maybe one thing that stood out for me is this issue that important and powerful women in politics are not just in the political parties, but also in the Electoral Commission, and how they are also kind of under threat from this negative messaging and hate speech, etc. So I think that's a really important point to remember. Other important points are, I'm happy to announce, being discussed in the chat. I'm so glad to also see a vivid discussion there. And I think one thing that came out was a question from Gretchen Bauer about if women are not, if we have more data on primaries, are women not running at all, or are they somehow weeded out at an early process? And I don't know if our next speaker can help us with that. Otherwise, it will be a question that we'll come back to in the Q&A. So I will introduce Esther Tewia. She is the founder and executive director of Gender Center for Empowering Development, GenCed, in Ghana. She has an MA in International Politics, International Relations from the University of Manchester, UK. GenCed is a non-profit, non-governmental organization that seeks to empower women and youth for sustainable development in Ghanaian communities through advocacy, training, and research. Esther has in the last 10 years worked on widening the civic space, participation, and representation of women, as well as gender-based violence in Ghana and Africa at large. Esther has observed elections in countries such as Kenya, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Nigeria. Please, the floor is yours. I'll give you 10 minutes and let you know when you have 1 minute left.
Okay. Thank you, and good day to our participants from other parts of the country, the world, and my other panelists. So we are discussing the gendered perspective of this 2020 election. And so I would want to take the conversation from looking at women's participation in key policy areas within political parties, like the manifesto drafting, and looking at how women are campaigning, and also look at parliamentary candidates. And I mean, yeah, of course, a slight mention of the vice presidential and presidential candidates. So as we know, Ghana, pretty much we are becoming a two-party state with MPP NDC. For the past, we've enjoyed our 25 years of stable democracy, and it's been dominated by these two parties. And for the past 25 years, none of the smaller parties has been able to get at least 1% of the parliamentary seats. So pretty much you can comfortably say that we are becoming two-party state. Now, if you look at 2020, the two parties, the two major parties, that's the National Democratic Congress, NDC, and the New Patriotic Party, that's the NPP. If you look at the composition of their manifesto team, That's a key policy document, which to me is very critical because it's what the parties do when they come to government. They try to implement those key policy documents. None of the party were able to get 30% representation of women on the committee. So clearly, it wasn't something that was good right from the word go. Representation there was low. However, they had a few. That's what I'm saying. They didn't get 30%. I want to use the mark 30%. So they didn't achieve it. Whether they got 10% or you didn't achieve it. So for me, that's it. Now, when we go into that same policy document, both two parties have been able to highlight certain key issues that affect women that they want to do. In the area of social protection, with the NDC, there's been mention of support system to Kayayo, that's the head porters, the ladies who carry things, support to them. There's been mention of registration into the national health insurance, mentorship programs, children on the street, that's all part of the things that these people want to do. MPP also is talking about how to link them to major social protection initiative that the government is already doing, like the LEAP and all those things. If you look at areas like education, yes, all of them have promised a lot. The NDC is saying that they are going to provide sanitary pads, take away the tax and all that, of which the MPP didn't say anything. But at the heat of their campaign launch, there was a mention of them working to make sure that sanitary pads are provided for schoolgirls, because currently sanitary pads is taxed 20%. And so we want the 20% off so that it will be part of the non-tax goods, health care goods, just like condom and the rest. So that we can keep the girl child in school, because statistics have shown that there are certain week, every one week, some girls are absent, and it's in the rural community a lot. There's a high level of teen pregnancy and all that. So there's that conversation. The NDC is talking about giving women a 4-month maternity leave. And also, so it's 3 months currently, but they want to increase it to 4 months. Of course, all of them are talking about the affirmative action policy. And so clearly, this year, you could see that the conversation on women is moving a bit further. It is not only on the affirmative. Previously, it's been solely, even though there's been slight mention of other areas, but majority of the conversation has been around increasing participation of women. But this year, there are certain soft issues that usually do not get the prominence in the space, but now they are getting the prominence in the political space. Now, when I move away from that to their campaign structure within the political party, again, none of them was able to get 30% within their campaign structure. Both parties has less than 10% representation within their national executive or national campaign team. And so you could see that clearly there is a challenge in that area. And for me, one of the biggest challenge I see is the fact that the national women organizers of these two parties are not independent. They are under the national organizer. So already you are under a national organizer and you are not prominent on the national campaign team, because the national campaign team, the national organizer is prominent there. And because you are under the national organizer, the assumption is that you are going to work with the national organizer in this area. So clearly, representation and all those things at that level, it is low. Now, when you move on to the main campaign, that is where you can comfortably say that there is an increase in young women and women participation in the campaigns process. Most of the young girls, loyal ladies for MPP, young women's whatever movement for MPP, they have kukudu ladies, they have professional ladies. NDC has the same thing, Mahama ladies, these ladies. The number of young women movements in the parties are increasing by the day. So it tells you that yes, they are not at the highest and the most important salient places you would want them to be. But when it comes to the grassroots campaigning, they are the ones doing the major role. Now, when you take key electoral areas like party participation in observing election, you realize that both parties, again, has less than 5% women as party agents. And in those women, the 5% usually are not, they are the ones who serve, who bring them food, who are in charge of logistics. So that particular area to this year, with the trainings and all that we have been monitoring the political party do, none of them is trying to change the mindset that we need to increase or we need to start pushing women participation in that area, because that's also a very critical part of the electoral process. That's also a very critical part of building capacity of women to understand the political system. So with this, you could say that the political parties are not doing much. Now, when you come to the parliamentary candidates, currently the NDC have 24 candidates, and the MPP also 23, and MPP had 24, but it just increased to 25 just recently after the death of the Fransman candidate whose wife has succeeded in. For me, I see that the issue with the gender with political party has to be with the political parties not conforming to international protocols and charters that has been signed. Because if I can comfortably say that the MPP has signed more gender charters, protocol that speaks to making sure that women's representation and all that are being adhered to. And if the country signs and ratify, automatically it's a law that needs to be domesticated. And then political parties are not above the law. So it is important that the political parties, we need to engage with them because their engagement is low. Again,
so 1 minute.
Oh, okay. We are talking about violence against women. You see, in the electoral space, I don't even want to consider the public more, but I want to focus on the political parties because this violence against women that is inhibiting their active political engagement is within the political parties. Online abuse is from political apparatchiks who think it is comfortable to attack. And it translates to how their followers also behave. So for 2020 election, it is the major problem with the political party starting the violence and their followers, I mean, the leadership and all that starting, and then their followers taking on board. And so what they do, it's move to the public. My last one will touch on the COVID. I say that the COVID has brought a different level of vote buying because people have lost their jobs. People really are suffering. So now politicians are finding ways to buy their votes through provision of COVID aid. And so what is happening now is that women who do not have that money already, we are struggling with money. Women who do not have that money are finding it a bit difficult to campaign. Because when you go, everybody is looking at you of provision, giving them food, giving them rice and all that to go and cook. So the COVID has kind of a way doubled the plight of the financial burdens on women in making sure that they run. But I'll take this conversation and go back to the political party and how their institutional structure is being done. Already, they don't do gender sensitive budgeting. They don't put in consideration so many things. So this year, their electoral, all of them, they don't have any gender sensitive budgets that will speak to addressing some of the old issues we have raised and COVID coming on board. So the whole thing this year with our political engagement resides on the political parties, yet they are not doing much. From where I sit, I can say that the ordinary Ghanaian women who are in the space of activism and all that are doing their best to make sure that women participate not only as candidates, but as voters. How do we let them feel confident? Because there's a lot of political instability now in certain areas of the country. How do we make sure? And so there are women who are acting as agents of peace and are in the communities, advocating and engaging key stakeholders and letting them understand why it's important that we maintain the peace that Ghana is enjoying. So you look at that dynamics, you could tell that the women, ordinary women, are doing their best. Now, the major problem that is facing us is with the political parties, how they will comply with some of the things that they've set out to and all that. Prof spoke about vigilantism. Yes, we have.
So we'll come back to that in the Q&A. But I think you have added a lot to the conversation in terms of the ordinary woman, the woman who gets engaged in the grassroots, her contribution to the parties, and it looks like the conversation on women are really moving forward in this election. So thank you for that outline, Esther. We have come to our last panelist, and already there have been questions and discussions about the role of media in our chat. So I'll invite our next panelist to discuss that. I just want to say before we go into the last presentation that please think of the questions that you want to pose to the panelists and put them in the Q&A. It's easier for us to manage the questions there so they don't just disappear in the chat. So please put them into the Q&A and we'll deal with them after the last presentation, which will be by Betty Kankambuadu. She is in charge of the communications at the Media Foundation for West Africa. Before joining the Media Foundation, she was acting editor-in-chief at Ringier, Africa Digital Publishing, Ghana office, known for the news website pulse.com.gh. She also worked as a broadcast journalist at City FM, one of Ghana's foremost influential radio stations, where she produced and narrated audio documentaries and anchored major news bulletins. With a radio and online journalism background, Betty has covered stories on politics, human rights, and social issues, with special interest in women and children. She's a member of the Global Editors Network, and she will also have 10 minutes. I'll jump in when 1 minute remains. Please take the floor.
Okay, hello everybody. So I've already been introduced, so I'll just go straight into the points that I would like to make. And I think that the three speakers, have touched on a lot, but I would like to consolidate that conversation by bringing in the media here, which is, my background and where I'm coming from. And we know that, the absence of women from political and powerful spaces is enforced in many ways through culture, religion, and of course, media coverage. So being a journalist, like I said, I can speak to this. And the media, we all know, plays a key role in development of nations which have adopted democracy as their system of governance. It has an influencing power, and it has the ability to reinforce perceptions. And this power is so great that it has to be utilized properly in order not to disadvantage any group in the society. And I think that in Ghana, and by extension, the media in general, we've done our best, particularly from the women's side, to balance the conversation. But there's always, a hindrance that obviously is rooted in male dominance and in patriarchy, if I want to put it that way. We have not done, the best of job in balancing the coverage and women representation on media platforms. And we're talking about, women participation in governance, in politics, as explained by the earlier speakers. But we know that the drivers of conversations is the media, the drivers of perceptions, they reinforce perceptions. So without the media, really, some of these things, will probably not be happening. And coming from the media, I'd like to say that we haven't really done well there. And that is because even in the media, exclusion is thriving. Even in the media, women don't have the voices that they deserve to have. Even in the media, women just participation is very low from the top to the even in the newsrooms, participation is very low. And I'd like to cite a survey that the Media Foundation for West Africa, where I work now, did. And they surveyed women in leadership and in media and women who own media. And the results were that 2 women solely own media in Ghana as at the time they did that research. And when it comes to media management, the men obviously outnumber the women in tremendous proportions. So even though the number of women working in newsrooms has increased over time, their voices are still being supervised by male media executives and male editors, who in many instances do not see the value in women's stories and even, in women leadership. The Alliance for Women in Media, ALMA, did a survey not too long ago, and they were, amongst the things that they were looking for, they were asking about, women rising to the leadership position. And, from the survey, it appeared that women are just used to, unfortunately, obviously not through no fault of theirs, but, they are used to the male leadership in the newsroom. And some of them, say that they've been denied promotions and all that. And if we're going to tackle, inclusion and participation in governance, in party politics, we really have to fix the issues with the media. So someone may say that, but why don't women engage, for instance? So in newsrooms, normally when we're looking for people to talk about maybe resource persons to talk about particular subjects, sometimes it's hard to get women. And over the past couple of, I think this year in particular, ALMA, for instance, has been very, very loud in making sure that we empanel a lot of women, in various discussions across board. And our experiences in the newsroom really have been, sometimes when you reach out to a woman to contribute to a particular conversation, like Dr. Edin mentioned earlier, the woman self-censors herself because he's worried about what the public will say about, her thoughts, about her ideas, about her opinion, which may be different from what is out there in the public. So the woman would have to self-censor. And when you interview them, they are so jittery and so worried about, can you take this part out? Do you think what I said is right? Do you think I'm going to get a negative backlash? Do you think that this will be accepted? Do you think that my submissions are intelligent enough? And these are what women have to go through, because at the end of the day, when their voice is out there, the criticism and the backlash that will follow, it leaves a lot of women out of the conversation. Because why bother, if I can just stay in my corner, do the great work that I'm doing and not suffer any abuse, why do I have to put myself out there like that? So these are some of the issues really that I think that, hinders or prevents, women participation and all that. I think that the media can do better if we have more women in leadership, in newsrooms, if we have more women owning media. And I have to say that recently in Ghana, a lot of the women have started, trying to own a piece of media. So you have a lot of them starting their own blogs to talk about issues in their communities, their own blogs to talk about, just to highlight and bring out strongly the voices of women. Let me just circle, back to the conversation on voting and then the affirmative action bill, rather. Dr. Madison, in her presentation said that it ranked 8th on issues of importance as surveyed by the NCCE. And I would say that I'm not surprised, because even though journalists and other activists have really tried to push this affirmative action bill, they are holding forums, they are walking, they are trying to call all attention to this, the coverage in the media has not been that strong, again, to reinforce perceptions and to change perceptions. It hasn't been that strong. And that's where, like I said, the media hasn't done much. And it's because men own the voices there. And sometimes even, unfortunately, when women are there, like I said earlier, they wield their power, they wield their voice, you know, in the lenses of men. And when the media gets a fair representation, when the conversations are balanced, what women feel, the aspirations will be brought to the table. Same for men, and then we can move the conversation forward. So let me just circle back also quickly to, you know, what the question about, you know, women have been voting for a very long time. And Esther said that in the ordinary Ghanaian woman is doing what she has to do, you know, when it comes to trying to vote and just trying to, you know, be an active participant in the electoral process. But for me, I think that women have been voting for quite some time now, and we haven't really, we don't have much to show for all the voting that we have done. And of course, it goes back to, you know, the participation in governance. Both the past president, John Dramani Mahama, said that she was going to meet the 30% quota. Nana Akufo-Addo, is the AU gender champion, said same. None of them none of them has been able to fulfill that. And now there's an issue of Kayaye, you know, both governments have promised. That's fine, noted. Both governments have promised to put a stop to this. It has not materialized. And, you know, just across board, the justice system, boss of state-owned enterprises, the list can go on and on and on. And nobody's really committed, you know, to push this. And that's because, you know, obviously there are a lot of men out there who don't, at the top, who don't see this as an issue. So hopefully, when the vice presidential candidate, Professor Nana Jane Opoku-Agyeman, is able to get to the top, then maybe actively we can see, you know, things change. And personally, if she gets there, I have a lot of expectations, because all these, the affirmative action bill, the property rights spouses bill, all those ones really that focuses on women, that focuses on making sure that women have a better share of the national cake, should really be resolved, because we're really tired of all the promises. So Kaiser, that would be my submission for now.
And a strong one at that. Thank you so much, Betsy, for your comments and passionate finishing. I guess there's really hope when you have a woman on the presidential tickets. Then it feels like a shift. Although conversations are ongoing in the chat, looking at numbers, it looks worse this year compared to 2016. We got feedback from Professor Gretchen Bauer, who gave us those numbers. So it's maybe too early to jump for joy. We've gotten some questions, which I will read out and then distribute to the panelists. Please continue giving questions there. Kwame Bedu says, good points, Diana. From your policy note, you're much aware of how interventions to make room for women always face some form of resistance, which you have coined as a battle. As you suggest, it's a brilliant short-term intervention to reserve seats in the strongholds of the two major parties. What challenges do you foresee? Do you think in the long term, a fast-track legislated political party electoral gender quota model is feasible in Ghana? So that one is for Ghana. I'm going to read out all the questions we have at this point. Faustina Bache has a question for Esther and Jensed. In Ghana, I believe there should be a distinction between state and party. Once that distinction is not made, we might tend to think that bills in parliament sign in international mandates and charters are by parties and not state. In addition, what do you say about the strong number of women participating as presidential and vice presidential candidates and chairpersons of parties? This year has seen a major rise in the number of women in the political race, I guess at the very top then. This should be noted because it's significant. Gretchen is saying, as president, Mahama had 32% women in cabinet, the 19 ministers, the highest ever in Ghana, and now he has a woman running mate. Joe Biden invited a black woman to be his VP. Male allies can play an important role, especially when they have appointive powers. Is there a call for gender parity cabinet for whoever wins the presidential race? I guess that's an open question. And Kwame Bidu has a second question, so I'll wait with that. I'll, I think, add my own question to Professor Kwesi Ening, and that is the role of academics in this conversation. I talk about the negative and even hate speech about women in politics. Are academics or other leaders in society doing their share? So let's start with that, Diana.
Yes, I think there was a question about this with the introduction of a quota. I think that Esther was very right in talking about the political parties and how they are not really so gender mainstreamed. I mean, the only reserved positions within the two political parties are actually the women's organizers. So because I mean, even if this or when this affirmative action bill gets adopted, it will be the political parties who is supposed to lay out how it is to be implemented in practice. And therefore, it's extremely important to point the finger at the political parties and what they are actually doing. And there are, I mean, the introduction of affirmative action can look in many ways, but and there are many different models that you can see on the African continent. So that's why there are so many different suggestions putting women in the strongholds. I mean, that would make them sure to win, of course. And this suggestion about increasing the number of parliamentarians, that's actually a suggestion coming from the Speaker of the Ghanaian Parliament. And I would say that's a more pragmatic suggestion, but also a very expensive suggestion just to increase the number of MPs, as Ghana already have 275 members of parliament, which is quite a lot. So I think maybe it would be good to introduce a more results-based quota. I think it's labeled kind of a women-only list, for example, could be a possibility, or the best losers, because as it is now, it is this system that the winners takes it all, which is also very excluding of newcomers to the political system, like women. Thank you.
Thanks, Esther.
Thank you. So, firstly, thank you very much for your question. But let me first of all state something. There's a nation and there's a government that run the state, I mean the nation basically. And there's one key democratic institution that governs every nation. And that key institution is political party. And so if you do not have a political party that understands the implication of signing protocols and treaties, it comes back to affect the state. Like I mentioned earlier, if you look at MPP, NDC, all of them have signed treaties and protocols that speaks to advancing the cause of women, accepting the fact that 30% needs to be given to women in leadership. In reality, if we are going by what they have signed, we don't even need to be fighting for affirmative action. We need to be fighting for the implementation of the domestication and implementation of the protocols and the charters they have agreed on themselves. You understand what I'm trying to say? So when we begin to force them to domesticate and implement it, we wouldn't have issues talking about them passing an affirmative action, which is becoming more or less impossible. Because as it stands now, everybody wants to take credit. Why is it everybody wants to take credit? MPP want to say, in my government, I passed the affirmative action. NDC want to say, in my government, I passed the affirmative action. And this is one of the main reasons why it is delaying the process. Because when MPP came in, they have to start the consultation and everything all over again, because they don't want to continue from where the NDC stopped. You understand? So this political parties will always undermine their importance. But for me, they are the most important democratic institution we have as a nation. For Ghana to progress, Ghana to deteriorate anything, this key democratic institution is responsible for it. They appoint our ministers, the executive, they do all those things. To the
so maybe Esther, on that note, the next question was from Gretchen about gender parity cabinet. Is there any such discussion that the major parties have promised to do better?
Okay, so I'll add on. So they appoint even the judiciary. They literally appoint everything in this country. They own the country. So when we are not forcing them to do the right thing, it becomes a problem. Now, talking about this year having a lot of vice presidential and all that, you realize that most of them are in the smaller party. And the smaller party, you and I know that with 2016 election, they didn't even get 1% of the national vote. Some of them, they are even not filing all parliamentary seats for 275. They haven't been able to do that. A few packets of things. So the smaller parties are dying out. They are the ones that give women the chance, because really the men are ready for the big money. They are not ready for losing any. So they give the women opportunity so that they can also be relevant. Now, when you talk about cabinet positions and all that, it is something, it's just recently that we started talking about it, that the political party are trying to say, oh, in my term, I appointed more cabinet ministers and all that. But not only cabinet ministers. Let's look at the ministerial positions. Nana has 120 something ministers, and we have less than 30 as female. Look at the 100 and something, less than 30. We don't even have up to 15% or 20% women as ministers. So if those things, being in cabinet and not having power to speak, really, it is not much. You can go and sit there. Yes, we all know that the gender ministry will definitely be part of the cabinet. But look, let's look at even the management of the COVID-19 and all that, and the role the gender ministry played. Look at the whole managerial committee that was set up. The gender ministry was tasked to take care of feeding and all that. But there are certain critical things that the gender ministry is supposed to be doing on that committee. Not only serving food and making sure that people get all that. We have pregnant women who needs to be taking care of this COVID, nursing mothers. How are we making sure that education gets to all these people? You understand? But you see, it is not a conversation. And even if you look at it, in terms of even the media landscape for this 2020 election, I would say there is an increase in media coverage in most of the media houses on women, because let's say TV3 has a program that is focused on projecting female candidates. GH1 also have a program that is focused on projecting women candidates. But my question is that gender issue is not a standalone issue. The media need to mainstream gender issues, so that when you're having your panelists, you make sure that as you are bringing the male candidates as panelists on your key listen to morning shows, you have women there. You mainstream it, you make it inclusive. So in your conversation, women are there, people's idea and focus on it. There are some people who don't watch certain times because this one, they're coming to show their women program. I'm not ready for that. But when it is a morning show and you have both the men, the women on it, because they love those shows, they will listen. So for me, within the media scape, if you look at the analysis, they are improving in terms of having a standalone programs to do that. But in terms of mainstreaming and all that, it is still not there. You do keep political programs like Newsfile, and even this Saturday, the panelists is men from head to toe.
I think we all agree with you that a big problem is the male dominance.
Exactly.
And I think I had a question to Professor Kwesi on this. Who should be responsible for changing the narrative, and can academics and other types of leaders in society do more? What do you think is the role of them?
No, I think we need a much more holistic approach to recognizing first and foremost the important roles that women have played, continue to play, and can play. And here we need different narrative, formats to bring this positive picture and then the contributory roles that they have played. And here I think all segments of society, away from the politicians themselves who are interested in decorative symbolisms in the numbers, I think chiefs, women's groups, youth groups, and of course, talking heads like us, academics, who can begin the disaggregation of what women do and the multiplicity of actions that they can take to make society a much better place. Let's not forget that the discourses around what women do and what their contributions are normally looked at within a particular type of lens. And it is those who look through that lens that we need to widen numbers, bring in different experiences. You know, we are talking about, you know, the numbers and women. Look, we need to take a couple of steps back. Several years ago, I think there's one participant on this program right now who was in another organization, and then we asked ourselves, what is it that drives an individual woman, person, to say, I want to compete in politics that is violent, abusive, expensive, and is exclusionary? That contestation starts from the home, where the woman tells her children, her husband, her partner, whoever, that have made this momentous decision. She now has to negotiate with her extended family, with her community, before even acceptance by the political party itself. You know, so there are these multiple barriers that we need to understand how they prevent the active role of women. And if we look just at the Fourth Republic, what senior male politicians say when women want to play a role. The criticisms relate to age, experience, education, wealth, their looks, clothing. And I think one person spoke about strong women, you know, so when you are described as a Margaret Thatcher, it is not a positive thing, it is negative if you are described as an Indira Gandhi. So we need a discourse that brings almost every single actor group to contribute to this. But certainly in framing and presenting the conversation, I think academics have a very key role to play. And I mean, we can also use, we are a very religious group. So one of the industries in Ghana is the charismatic group. And they are all, this is their profitable season. So they are all prophesying left, right, and center who will become the president and will become the presidential pastor. You know, so were we to get them on our side and to say, look, how do you tune your language in a manner that is positive, encouraging, inclusive, and invites women to play these roles in society? That would be very useful.
Fantastic. I think you even answered Julius Quash's question, because now we're doing another round of questions, because he was asking what role can religion play, but I feel like that's what you just answered. At the moment, we just have one question in the Q&A, so I think I will invite the panelists also if you have questions for each other. I'm going to read out Kwame Bidu's question. He says, for interventions for improving women participation in politics, Prof. Enning calls for government statutory interventions. Maybe Prof can say some interventions we can work with going forward. So I hope you have taken note of that. I would also like to ask two questions myself. The first one is for Betty. Since you have personal experience of being an editor in a Ghana newsroom, I would like you to, if you want to, share with us what that experience was like. Was that a difficult experience for being a relatively young woman? Or do you think that because it also kind of transitioned with the social media space, that space is somehow different? And then I have a question for Esther. Maybe Betty, you want to comment on that too. And that's the issue of Me Too and how that played out in Ghana. 2017 saw a wave of feminist awakening across the globe, where women protested against sexual harassment, and this was a big conversation in Ghana as well. There was discussions around high-profile rape cases, and I feel like there was a big brouhaha on that. Is that playing out in the election? I remember, for instance, Pepperdam Ministries were big for a while, and other backlashes like, what was it called, Sugar Them Ministries, who said we should rather pamper men and not pepper them and demand our space in there. So let's start with Professor Enning, and then I'll come to Betty and then Esther.
Well, let me go back to the first concluding remark that I made, that women are Ghana's hidden treasure. They have been for centuries, and they will continue to be for as long as I can imagine. If there's a consensus recognizing the important roles that women play and the multiple roles that they play, it is possible, and it must be possible for us to have this conversation that says, for every political party where a woman either goes through the primaries and becomes an actual candidate, that the states provide X amount of financial support. And before people chop off my head, when we stop this conversation, we've just provided X amount of police protection to parliamentarians. We provide vehicles, but we haven't costed all these things. Okay, so what I'm asking for is a prioritization of the manner in which the state uses its resources by recognizing that over the last 60 years, the state's recognition and support of what women can do and have done and are willing to do have not been provided. That legal, financial, logistical support, and therefore we need to do that. Now, this is a debate or a conversation that might take time to get the traction that is needed. But I think when it's placed on the table, it allows us to begin to have a conversation. Two relates to political parties themselves. That political party leadership must, through their actions and words, send a clear message to the teeming women that they are willing and prepared to support them. And let me come back to the abuse. Look, the numbers are important, but I will argue here clearly that they are decorative and they are symbolic. Because the abuse that Nana Jane got and the silence of the major political party, it took only Esla Owusu, the Minister for Communications, to speak out boldly to say, look, the argument with Nana is about contestation of ideas. But Esla has come to this because she herself has been a victim over the past 20 years of abuse, physical and verbal, psychological threats. Okay. So how the real question becomes, how can the state step in together with the supporting infrastructures to provide a protective and an encouraging sheen that allows women to attain the promise that they can contribute to our country?
So I was hoping you would give us some suggestions, because we're really being impatient here. We're waiting for things to change.
No, I mean, the political parties themselves must, within their own party structures, about the National Women's Organizer working through the National Organizer. Now, structurally, if women form X amount of percentage, then the National Women's Organizer within these parties must be a standalone, aspect or unit within the party structure responding or reporting directly to the Secretary General. Okay, so party structures must be looked at first and foremost as to how to enhance the position of particularly the national.
Okay, I see what you're saying. You're siding with Esther there, that it starts and ends with the party.
Yeah,
maybe just an insight from Sweden that now has a feminist foreign policy is that it started with parties doing mixed lists. So you had every other woman, every other man on the list.
So parties themselves must recognize that. And then by promoting the women in their parties, encouraging them to contest.
Good. Okay, so there was a question for Betty and then for Esther.
Okay, so I'll go and then Esther can come. I think the question was, my experiences of, being in a newsroom and running a newsroom. So I would say that, so my experience in being in a newsroom, particularly when I was doing radio, was great. I remember before I got into the newsroom, there weren't a lot of women there, and there was actually this perception that I remember, I'm not going to name names, but I remember one of the editors then told me that they normally he doesn't like to hire women because, the work we do in a newsroom, the time can be very ungodly. You could be called at any time to go and cover a story. And sometimes either women have excuses or women find themselves in situations where they can't go because maybe they have to take care of their babies and, they have to take care of their husbands or something like that. So there weren't a lot of women in the newsroom, but it later on improved, and then it was also because the new crop of women and even the old ones that were there proved that we can do the job, and call us at any time, we can do the job. And then I moved on to another newsroom where I took up a leadership role. And I would say that was where the challenge really was, because on the continent, the market on the continent, I was the only female amongst the men. And at some point you feel like your voice has to be extra strong because these men are there and they are all reporting to another CEO who is a man. So you feel like you have to argue harder, you have to be extra assertive, and you really have to go for it. And unfortunately, in my attempt to do that, I was described as aggressive. You're too aggressive.
Yes. I think this comes back to the thin line Professor Enning was talking about, that women in powerful positions have to thread in Ghana. I want to invite Esther also before, because we had 2 more questions. Yeah.
Okay. So listen, let's be honest with ourselves. This part of our world is ruled by patriarchy, and it is difficult for patriarchy to lessen. And again, the polarization of our Ghanaian media space prevents certain key important conversation about women to be discussed. The Me Too movement started in Ghana to the point that a Ghanaian lady based in the US filed a complaint against the president of the Ghana Bar Association of rape and the former chair of the legal aid. And you ask me, what happened? The media was polarized about the issue. The issue was not taken serious, to the extent that the Ghana Bar Association itself didn't really, to me, they didn't take it serious because the person is still the president of the association. So the Me Too movement in Ghana didn't get the grounding that in other jurisdictions it did. Again, the media, most of the media houses which are vibrant are owned by politicians, and the semi-acclaimed private ones who they claim are not politically affiliated are all one way or the other affiliated to the political parties, because really Ghanaian, pay, they don't buy the media, the newspapers and all that. So they also feel that the more we align ourselves with the political parties, the more we are able to get adverts and certain things, kickbacks here and there from them to run our media houses. So anything to them that will affect a party that they believe or a bit affiliated to, it doesn't gain the grounding and all that. So for me, the Me Too movement in Ghana didn't gain grounding just because of that. And looking at the election and reporting on issues on violence against women, see, there are lots of women who are running for office this year who are going through a lot of violence, but the media don't pay attention to it because they think that those things don't sell. Those things will not give them the traffic they need. However, people like Eslausu, as Prof said, when she's beaten or something, the media will want to report it because to the media, this is a woman who has distinguished herself and she's gotten the voice and she's been on morning shows and all that. So when we talk about her, it is news and it will direct traffic to our media houses. So that's the perception. So as we are seeing the violence against women as a threat to their political participation, the media doesn't see it that way to push to make sure that we get the right thing. For me, I've talked about the political parties, but in my view, I think that the media houses, the National Media Commission, would really need to be working on some of these things. How do we make sure that the media is doing the right thing? How do we regulate what we are seeing in the media space? The violence and the stereotyping, and sometimes you ask yourself, are you listening to an ethical journalism, or are they doing journalism for fun? You understand?
Yes, so, yes. No, I think I agree with you. That's the top. It's also important that they get into the media situation, but maybe also from below, as with personalities like Betty. We had two last questions that I would like to squeeze in before we close, and I think I'll ask Diana to say one or two things on this. Jürgen Levin asks, I have a question on empowerment and one district, one factory policy. Conceptually, trickle-down economics do not work, or did it work in Ghana, he's asking. Lamnatu Adam is asking about monetization of the political participation. What can be done about it? Because it's clearly a problem. Diana?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can answer the question about the one factory, so I will stick to the other one and leave Kwesi or others to talk about Jürgen's question. About the monetarization of politics, I mean, what has been done is the halving of the filing fees of the parties, but I have argued, and others with me, that the big spending is not really about the filing fees. The big spending is about the campaigning expenses. So that doesn't really help very much, although it's a kind of a recognition of women's disadvantaged economic opportunities. But what some parties have had in their manifestos earlier have, for example, been the idea of setting up a fund for female parliamentary candidates. And there has also been some quite successful programs for support of female candidates in, for example, Malawi. So that's one way to go.
Thank you so much, Diana. So we're running out of time, unfortunately, so we need to close. I want to thank the panel and all of you who made time for this important conversation on a gendered perspective of the Ghana elections 2020. We'll also send you a participant survey when you close your webinar window, so please give us a minute and make us better in the future. I want to also thank our administrator, Camilla Letzma, for your assistance in making this seminar success. Please follow Nordic Africa across social and surf into nai.uu.se to access our resources, policy notes, and opportunities. Thank you all for today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.